Under the heavy gray sky of Pine Hollow, where snow blanketed the forest in a silence broken only by the crunch of frost, 15-year-old Nora trudged through the woods, her breath visible in the icy air. She'd come to escape the weight of her parents' arguments, their voices still echoing in her mind, but she never expected to stumble into a moment that would test her courage. Her boots sank into the fresh powder as she rounded a cluster of pines, and that's when she saw it. A bear cub, no bigger than a dog shivering in the snow, its tiny body scarred and bloodied from the jagged teeth of a hunter's trap still clamped around its hind leg. The cub's whimpers pierced the stillness, its dark eyes wide with fear, and Nora's heart clenched. She couldn't leave it to die. But as she stepped closer, a low growl rumbled through the trees, sending a shiver down her spine. From the shadows, the cub's mother emerged, a massive bear with matted fur and a limp, her own flank torn open by a wound that glistened red against the snow. The mother's eyes locked onto Nora, fierce and protective, her stance a warning that she'd do anything to save her baby. Nora froze, her pulse racing, torn between the urge to help and the danger staring her down. Could she possibly earn the trust of a wounded wild bear before it was too late? Have you ever faced a fear to help someone in need? Like if Nora's story already grips you, and keep watching to see what happens next. Nora stood motionless in the snowy clearing of Pine Hollow, the mother bear's growl reverberating through the frosty air, a primal warning that sent her heart hammering against her ribcage. The massive creature loomed just yards away, her fur a patchwork of black and brown, matted with clumps of ice and streaked with blood from the gaping wound on her flank. The bear's eyes, dark and unyielding, bore into Nora, her body tense with a mother's fierce instinct to protect her cub, even as she swayed slightly, her injured leg trembling under her weight. Nora's breath came in shallow bursts, the cold biting at her exposed cheeks, but she couldn't tear her gaze from the cub at her feet. The little bear whimpered softly, its hind leg caught in the rusted jaws of a hunter's trap, the metal teeth digging into its flesh with every weak struggle. Blood had pooled in the snow beneath it, staining the white powder a cruel red, and its tiny chest heaved with shallow breaths, each one a quiet plea for survival. She knew she should run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee from the danger of a wounded bear, but the cub's desperate cries anchored her to the spot. Nora thought of her own family, the fractured arguments that had driven her into the woods that day, the way her parents' voices had clashed like thunder while she sat silently, feeling small and powerless. She couldn't abandon this cub, not when it needed her, not when she understood what it felt like to be caught in a trap of her own. Swallowing her fear, Nora crouched slowly, her movements deliberate, her eyes flickering between the cub and its mother. The mother bear growled again, a deep guttural sound that vibrated through the trees, but she didn't charge. Instead, she took a hesitant step forward, her injured leg dragging in the snow, her gaze never leaving Nora. Nora's hands trembled as she reached for the trap, her fingers brushing against the icy metal. It was old and rusted, the kind of cruel device that had been outlawed years ago but still lingered in forgotten corners of the forest, a relic of careless hunters. The cub flinched at her touch, its whimpers growing sharper, and Nora whispered a silent apology, her breath fogging in the air. She gripped the trap's jaws, pulling with all her strength, her arms straining as the metal groaned but refused to budge. The mother bear shifted closer, her massive form casting a shadow over Nora, her hot breath visible in the cold as she snorted, a mix of pain and warning in her stance. Nora's pulse quickened, her mind racing with the fear that one wrong move could provoke the bear. But she couldn't stop now, not when the cub's life depended on her. After what felt like an eternity, the trap finally gave way with a harsh snap, the jaws springing open just enough for Nora to free the cub's leg. The little bear let out a pained yelp, its body trembling as Nora gently lifted it from the snow, cradling it in her arms. Its fur was soft but matted with blood, and its small frame felt fragile against her chest, as if it might break with the slightest pressure. She glanced up at the mother bear, expecting a roar or a charge, but the bear only watched, her eyes softening slightly, as if she understood Nora's intent. Nora's heart swelled with a flicker of hope, but the danger was far from over. The cub was weak, and the mother's wounds were severe. She needed to find shelter, a place to tend to them both. But the forest stretched endlessly around her, and the storm clouds overhead were growing darker by the minute. Nora clutched the bear cub tightly as she trudged through the deepening snow of Pine Hollow, her boots sinking with every step, the icy wind stinging her face like 1,000 tiny needles. The cub's small body trembled in her arms, its whimpers softer now, but no less urgent, its bloodied leg leaving faint red streaks on her jacket. She could feel its heartbeat, faint but steady, a fragile rhythm that urged her to keep moving despite the ache in her arms and the fear gnawing at her insides. Behind her, the mother bear followed at a cautious distance, her massive form a dark silhouette against the snowy trees, her injured leg dragging a trail through the powder. Each step seemed to pain her, her flank glistening with fresh blood. But her eyes never left Nora, a mix of wariness and desperate hope flickering within them. The forest was silent save for the crunch of snow and the occasional groan of branches bending under the weight of the storm, the air growing heavier with the promise of more snow to come. Nora's destination was a small cave she'd stumbled upon during past explorations, a hidden nook tucked beneath a rocky outcrop, shielded by a curtain of frozen ivy. It wasn't much, but it would offer shelter from the worsening weather and a place to tend to the cub's wounds. She pushed through the ivy, the brittle strands snapping against her shoulders, and stepped into the dim cavern. The air inside damp but warmer than the biting cold outside. The cave smelled of moss and earth, its walls jagged with ancient stone, and a faint drip of water echoed from somewhere deep within. Nora knelt and gently set the cub down on a bed of dry leaves she'd gathered, her hands shaking as she examined its leg more closely. The trap had left deep gashes, the flesh torn and swollen, and she knew infection could set in if she didn't act fast. She tore strips from her scarf, using melted snow from her canteen to clean the wounds, her fingers numb from the cold but steady with purpose. The cub flinched at her touch, its tiny claws digging into the leaves, but it didn't pull away, as if it sensed her intent to help. The mother bear lingered at the cave's entrance, her massive frame blocking the light, her breath coming in heavy snorts that fogged the air. Nora glanced at her nervously, her heart racing at the thought of being so close to a wild animal that could kill her with a single swipe. But the bear didn't enter. She simply watched, her body slumped with exhaustion, her own wounds taking a toll. Nora noticed a piece of jagged metal embedded in the bear's flank, likely from the same trap that had caught her cub, and her stomach twisted with a mix of pity and fear. She knew she had to help the mother too, but gaining her trust would be a delicate dance. One wrong move, and she might not survive the encounter. Still, she couldn't ignore the bear's pain, not when she saw the same protective love in her eyes that she longed to feel from her own fractured family. As night fell, the storm outside grew fiercer, the wind howling through the trees like a chorus of ghosts. Nora worked by the faint light of her flashlight, wrapping the cub's leg with the makeshift bandages, her hands stained with blood and dirt. The cub's breathing steadied, its whimpers fading into soft, exhausted huffs, and Nora felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. But the mother bear's low growls reminded her that this was only the beginning. She had to find a way to save them both, or risk losing everything to the unforgiving wilderness. Have you ever felt torn between fear and hope? Like if you're cheering for Nora, and share your own story of bravery in the comments below? The storm raged outside the cave in Pine Hollow, the wind screaming through the trees as snow piled high against the entrance, sealing Nora inside with the bear cub and its wounded mother. The air in the cavern grew colder, the faint drip of water now, frozen into silence, and Nora's flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows on the stone walls. She knelt beside the cub, her hands trembling as she adjusted the bandages on its leg, the little bear's breathing now steadier but still fragile, its dark eyes watching her with a trust that made her chest ache. She'd done all she could for the cub, But the mother bear at the cave's entrance remained a looming threat, her low growls a constant reminder of the danger Nora faced. The massive bear had inched closer over the hours, her injured leg dragging behind her, her flank still oozing blood around the jagged piece of metal embedded in her flesh. Nora knew she couldn't leave the mother untreated, not if she wanted to save them both. But the thought of approaching a wild, wounded bear sent waves of fear crashing through her. She took a deep breath, the icy air burning her lungs, and turned to face the mother bear, her flashlight beam catching the glint of the bear's eyes, fierce yet clouded with pain. Nora's heart pounded as she reached into her backpack, pulling out a small first aid kit she'd packed for emergencies, its contents meager but better than nothing. She held up a strip of gauze, her movements slow and deliberate, as if to show the bear she meant no harm. The mother bear snorted, her massive head lowering, her body tensing as if ready to charge. But she didn't move forward. Nora's voice trembled as she whispered words of reassurance to herself, her mind racing with memories of her parents' arguments, the way they'd pushed her away without realizing it. She saw the same fierce love in the bear's eyes that she craved from her own family, and it gave her the courage to take a step closer, her boots crunching softly on the cave floor. The bear growled again, a deep rumble that echoed in the cavern, but Nora didn't stop. She knelt a few feet away, her hands steady as she prepared a makeshift compress, soaking the gauze in melted snow to clean the wound. The metal shard in the bear's flank was lodged deep, the surrounding fur matted with blood and dirt, and Nora knew removing it would be risky. She glanced at the cub, its tiny form curled up on the leaves, and felt a surge of determination. She had to do this, for both of them. With a steady hand, she reached out, her fingers brushing the bear's fur, expecting a swipe or a roar, but the bear only flinched, her growl softening into a pained huff. Nora worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best she could, her hands slick with blood, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she gripped the metal shard and pulled. The bear let out a guttural roar, her body jerking, and Nora stumbled back, her heart in her throat, fearing she'd pushed too far. But the bear didn't attack. Instead, she slumped to the ground, her massive frame shuddering as the pain subsided, the metal shard now lying in the snow, bloodied but removed. Nora's hands shook as she pressed the gauze against the wound, staunching the bleeding, her eyes locked on the bear's, searching for a sign of aggression. Instead, she saw something else, relief and a flicker of trust. The mother bear's head lowered, her nose nudging the cub gently, as if to check on her baby, and Nora felt tears sting her eyes. She'd done it. She'd earned the trust of a wild bear, and in that moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if they'd all survive the night.